Caitlin Clark, all right? The Indiana Fever star was named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year earlier this week, and she took time to acknowledge that race played a role in her success this
Earlier
year.
this week, Caitlin Clark was named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year, a prestigious honor in the world of sports. It was a crowning moment in a year that saw her breaking records and changing the game.
You see why I had no problem with her being Time's Athlete of the Year? You see why I said that she should have been on Team USA?
But instead of simply basking in her individual accomplishments, Caitlin did something that many wouldn't expect. She took a moment to reflect on her own privilege. She acknowledged the advantages she's had, particularly as a white athlete in a league that has long been shaped by black women. And in doing so, Caitlin Clark ignited a conversation that's rattling the entire sports world. But here's where it gets interesting. While Caitlin Clark's honesty about her privilege was refreshing to some, it sparked backlash from others in the WNBA community. Notably, legendary players like Sheryl Swoopes have voiced their discontent, questioning whether Clark's success was due to her talent or her race. It's a complex situation that goes far beyond the basketball court.
You see why I had to go off on the likes of Sheryl Swoopes and others who were clearly distant and dismissive of
Now,
her?
entering the conversation is none other than Stephen A. Smith. A force in the sports media world, Stephen A. has never been one to shy away from controversy, and his defense of Caitlin Clark has been nothing short of fierce. But his argument isn't just about defending a single player, it's about challenging the narrative surrounding women's sports, race, and privilege. Stephen A. argues that the anger and resentment directed at Clark for simply improving the conditions in the WNBA is misplaced. Let's break this down because the conversation is much deeper than it may seem. This isn't just about Caitlin Clark being named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year. It's about the systemic issues in women's sports that have been ignored for far too long. It's about a long-standing struggle for recognition, respect, and proper working conditions. And it's about how one athlete's rise to fame has become a catalyst for a broader movement to understand the full impact of Caitlin Clark's fame. We need to take a step back and examine the state of the WNBA before her arrival.
Here's a passage from the article in Times Magazine. Quote, I want to say I've earned every single thing, but as a white person, there is privilege. A lot of those players in the league that have been really good have been black players.
For over 2 decades, the league has struggled with basic issues like poor travel conditions, low pay, and a lack of media coverage. WNBA players have been forced to fly commercial, deal with delays, and endure grueling travel schedules just to play the game they love. Yet, despite these challenges, the league and its players have persevered. Legends like Sheryl Swoopes, Lisa Leslie, and Dawn Staley helped shape the WNBA into what it is today, and their contributions cannot be overstated. But for all their hard work, the league has faced significant barriers in terms of recognition and financial support. This is where Caitlin Clark's arrival into the WNBA becomes significant. Clark, who had already made a name for herself as one of the most electrifying players in college basketball, joined the Indiana Fever and immediately brought attention to the league in ways it had never seen before. Within just 2 weeks of her debut, Clark's presence sparked a major change.
Caitlin Clark hasn't spoken against anybody. She hasn't assisted in denying anybody else the privileges they deserve. If anything, she's tried to provide assistance.
The WNBA secured chartered flights for its players, something they had been lobbying for years. For 22 years, players had been forced to fly commercial, dealing with uncomfortable conditions and lengthy travel times. But once Caitlin Clark arrived on the scene, things changed almost overnight. And while that should be celebrated as a win for the league and its players, some in the WNBA community weren't so thrilled. Here's the kicker. Caitlin Clark wasn't the one who created the systemic issues in the WNBA. She didn't build a system that undervalued women's sports or failed to provide adequate compensation for the players. Yet, when she acknowledged her white privilege in Time magazine, some people in the WNBA reacted with anger and resentment. They argued that Clark's success was due to her race, not her talent or hard work. But Stephen A. Smith has been quick to defend Clark. He argues that the anger directed at her is misguided. After all, Clark isn't the problem, she's part of the solution. By using her platform to advocate for better conditions and bring more attention to the league, Caitlin Clark has done more for the WNBA than many would have imagined. Her rise to fame has led to record-breaking viewership, sold-out arenas, and more media coverage than ever before. And while the league still faces challenges, the trajectory has finally begun to point upward. Stephen A. has pointed out that this situation isn't just about basketball, it's about the larger issue of systemic inequality in women's sports. Just like in the civil rights era, when black leaders welcomed white allies who fought for equality, we must embrace those who are working to make things better, even if their presence disrupts the status quo. When Caitlin Clark speaks about privilege, she's not trying to diminish the accomplishments of black players. She's trying to lift them up by acknowledging the role they've played in shaping the WNBA. Stephen A. Smith's defense of Caitlin Clark is more than just a reaction to a sports controversy.
There was resentment towards her, and here's why I said it was stupid. Because when she came into the end,
it's a call for unity in the fight for progress. He draws parallels between Clark's rise and the broader fight for equality in sports. The real enemy, he argues, isn't the players who are trying to bring change, but the system that has held women's basketball back for so long. It's the corporate structures that have undervalued the league, the decision-makers who have ignored the needs of the players, and the media that has failed to give women's sports the attention it deserves. What Stephen A. is driving at is that we need to stop fighting over who is responsible for bringing change and start focusing on how we can make the most of the opportunities when they arise. Caitlin Clark may be the one leading the charge right now, but her success is benefiting everyone in the league. Her platform has amplified the voices of black women in the WNBA, and that's something that should be celebrated, not resented, as Stephen A. so eloquently put it. A rising tide lifts all boats.
Into the WNBA. For 22 plus years, they had been flying commercials. They were begging for chartered flights. She arrives there, and 2 weeks later,
Caitlin Clark isn't just rising on her own. She's bringing the entire league up with her. By using her privilege to advocate for better conditions and bring attention to the league, she's helping create a better future for all players, regardless of their race or background. This isn't just about Caitlin Clark or the WNBA. It's about the future of women's sports as a whole, as Stephen A. pointed out. We're witnessing a fundamental shift in how women's sports are perceived, marketed, and supported. The increase in viewership, sponsorships, and media coverage is proof that the demand for women's sports is growing. But we need to make sure that this growth is sustainable and equitable. Caitlin Clark's rise to fame has opened doors that were previously closed to many female athletes. Companies are finally taking notice, and the WNBA is receiving the attention it deserves.
And people were resenting her for it, like she was the cause of the problems that they had for the lack of recognition. No, she just happened to be born white.
But as Stephen A. emphasized, the real question is, what will we do with this moment? Will we allow old resentments and divisions to hold us back? Or will we embrace the opportunity to create a more equitable future for women in sports? The truth is that Caitlin Clark's success isn't a zero-sum game. Her rise to prominence doesn't take away from the legacies of players like Cheryl Swoops or Lisa Leslie. In fact, it brings more attention to their incredible achievements. And as the WNBA grows and evolves, it's essential that we recognize the contributions of those who came before and continue to build on their work, looking to the future. Stephen A. Smith made a powerful point. Years from now, people won't remember the controversy surrounding Caitlin Clark's rise to fame. They'll remember this as the moment when women's basketball finally started getting the recognition and respect it deserved. They'll remember how one player used her privilege not to exclude others, but to lift them up. And that's the legacy Caitlin Clark is creating, one that will benefit future generations of female athletes. In the end, it's not about who brings the change. It's about what we do with it when it arrives. Caitlin Clark is leading the charge, but it's up to all of us to ensure that women's basketball continues to rise. The opportunity is here, and we can't afford to let it slip away. So the next time you hear someone criticize Caitlin Clark or argue about race, privilege, or who deserves what, remember this. The real measure of progress isn't about who brings it, it's about what we do with it. And right now, we have a chance to create something extraordinary for women's sports. However, it's not enough to simply acknowledge this growth. We need to ensure that it's sustainable and equitable. Companies are now taking notice of the WNBA's potential, and it's clear that the league is poised to grow even more in the coming years. But the real question, as Smith puts it, is, what will we do with this moment? Will we allow old resentments and divisions to hold us back, or will we embrace the opportunity to create a more equitable future for women in sports? Caitlin Clark's success isn't a zero-sum game. Her rise doesn't diminish the achievements of past WNBA legends like Cheryl Swoops or Lisa Leslie. In fact, it brings more attention to their legacies. As the WNBA continues to grow, it's crucial that we honor the contributions of those who came before and continue to build on their work, looking to the future. Stephen A. Smith emphasizes that the legacy of Caitlin Clark will not be defined by this controversy. Instead, it will be remembered as the moment when women's basketball finally started getting the recognition it deserved. Clark has used her privilege to amplify the voices of those who have been overlooked for far too long, and that's something that will benefit future generations of female athletes. The fight for equality and respect in women's sports is far from over, but Caitlin Clark's success has given us an opportunity to change the narrative. It's not about who brings the change. It's about what we do with it when it arrives. The opportunity to create something extraordinary for women's sports is here, and we can't afford to let it slip away. At Sport Pulse, we're committed to keeping you informed on the most important stories in women's basketball. This ongoing conversation is essential to creating a more equitable future for female athletes. As we continue to track the rise of Caitlin Clark and the WNBA, remember that the fight for recognition is not just about one player, it's about the future of women's sports as a whole. Stay tuned for more updates and insights on this transformative journey.